Folks. It's 7 o'clock Mountain Time, so we're going to begin. We're looking forward very much tonight to a wonderful town hall. We're going to speak about the status of the Wedgwood Ravine Area Surplus School Site. We're very happy to have a lot of people, both from our community and outside our community, that have joined us tonight for this event. And I'm going to call it an event because at the current number we've got, it's the largest webinar we've had. So that's exciting. So we're going to just take 5 minutes at the beginning to I'll do some brief introductions and I'll do the meeting protocols. Then we're going to jump into 3 presentations, one by Sarah Hamilton, our ward councillor, and Kyle Payne, who is with the city administration. And they're going to run through some slide decks for us to be able to understand, and we'll go from there. Then we're going to have Carol Bruneman speak on behalf of the Wedgwood Ravine Community League for approximately 5 minutes. And then we're going to have Robert Worth speak for the group we're calling Save Wedgewood Park Group. And Robert will have 5 minutes as well to talk. After that, we're going to open it up to questions and answers. Myself, Dean, and Marshall are going to moderate that, so we get a nice selection of questions from either the raised hand process, the Q&A process, or the chat process. Or we also had many questions that came in through our wedgwood.ca website that will introduce those as well as we're moving along. So if that's good for everybody, let's move on to the protocols. I won't go too far with these, but I will go through them because it's very important that we understand. We're going to start at 7, as mentioned, very prompt. We want to get to the information. If anyone on the call gets disconnected, please just go back to that link that you have, and you should be able to get reintroduced back into the meeting. If for some reason you still can't, then I'd please ask that you go to the wedgwood.ca website, send the communication director an email, and I'll try to adjust it during the meeting as we're moving along. We recommend that everyone use a laptop for the best possible quality, viewing and speaking quality. Smartphones, tablets can be used, but again, from all of our different webinars that we've had or Zoom calls that we've hosted, the quality does become worse is the better word. Your speaker and audio will not be turned off, but we will ask that everyone turns it off, or our Ethan, who's running all our cameras behind the scenes, might turn it off just in case there's some annoyances with that. Primarily, you'll see the panelists, and when your hand is raised or you're asked to ask a question, then your camera will go on as well as your audio. The town hall in its entirety is being recorded, including the Q&A and chat portions. This is for WRHO purposes, and we also make this recording available to those who can't attend on our website to all of the homeowners. So it's a nice feature for people who couldn't attend tonight to have a chance to take a look at that. There are 3 possible ways to ask to speak or to be heard, either in a question form, comment form. One, you can raise your hand and you'll be acknowledged by the meeting moderator or one of our chat moderators. Then you'll be asked to speak. I'll explain those speaking protocols a little bit later. You can go through the Q&A or the chat process to get that information that you want to share, whether it's a comment or whether it's a question. We'll have one of our chat moderators read that out. And we do ask that all of your questions remain respectful and pertinent to the topics that's being reviewed at our town hall tonight. It's very important that we continue to be professional, respectful with everyone, and always manage this in the best situation. It's always the best way to do it. So for the question and answer process, we would appreciate, there's 5 minutes allotted for these. So the first 1 to 2 minutes will be for the question person asking the question to ask their question. We ask that you be as succinct as possible with your questions, not trying to extend too far beyond that. Then the city representative or Sarah, who I think will be answering the majority of the questions tonight, they'll have about approximately 2 minutes for that rebuttal or the talk that goes around it. And then there'll be 1 minute following that for rebuttal and questions. And we'll have a timer available for everybody when we do that. I will warn everyone during those 5-minute segments if we're getting close and we need to manage that. If it's a good discussion and it's a productive discussion in terms of something that's new being brought forward with regards to topics, I can extend our time with regards to that so we can allow more time for that. So we have a little structure with that. There will be no WRHO Wedgwood Ravine Homeowners Association motions brought forward during this meeting. It is a town hall and it's for the purposes of understanding the whole what's going on with the surplus school site. A warning may be provided to the person at any time by the meeting moderator if they're speaking too long on a topic or they become disrespectful. If that does occur and it's not stopped, we do have the ability to pause people's video and their speaker. And if it continues, we would just have to ask that person or make that person leave the meeting accordingly. But I'm sure we'll be okay with that. I don't think we have anything to worry about that. You also have a chat function that you can use amongst the 180 plus people. Again, we have that being looked at so that if there are pertinent questions or anything that's coming out of it, we can ask those things and use those as we are. But again, we ask that it remains pertinent and respectful to the discussions we're having tonight. I hope everyone has a great meeting here. I'm really looking forward to it. I know our community has for a little lengthy period of time wanted this. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. So Sarah, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you so much for setting up this town hall. As soon as the policy change happened, I think it was one of the things that I said to Dean and I said to other members of the community was that we would get a town hall together because there was a lot of questions and it was important for me and Crystal Kajenner, who couldn't be with us tonight, but Kyle is acting in her place. But we said it was really important to get members to be really clear with what the information was. And so it took us a minute to set this up. So thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you, Jim, for the great introduction. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm very grateful for your time to have the opportunity to talk about what is happening with the surplus school site in Wedgwood community and provide some clarity and I'm hoping some surety regarding some of the concerns that we've heard about. I can't see if the presentation is up, but a quick review of how this evening is going to flow. So we're going to have the presentation, as Jim mentioned. I promised that it would be about 20-ish minutes long. And then we're going to open the floor to the Community League and the Save Wedgewood Park Group to share their comments. And then it was really important that we get to questions. So I think we've left a lot of time for questions from the community. So I'll go to,
You have control there, Sarah?
Do I have control of the presentation? Let's see if I can.
I can do it. Go ahead.
Okay, there. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm not as well versed in Zoom, so I appreciate this, Jim. Thank you. So as I said, my name is Sarah Hamilton. I am the City Councillor for Ward CP Weeneewak. Now, I was first elected in 2017 when the ward was known as Ward 5. And I was honored to be reelected in 2021. So I haven't served on this council as long as the surplus school site conversation has been going on, but I truly understand the concerns and frustrations in the neighborhood regarding the lack of transparency and clarity on this development. So also with me tonight is Kyle Payne, a principal planner with the City of Edmonton. He is working in project planning and implementation in the social development branch. Kyle is responsible for coordinating the development of the Wedgwood surplus site, and he has extensive knowledge of the site history and how we might best move forward. So before we get started, I also want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory. It's the ancestral homeland of diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Blackfoot people. And we also acknowledge this as the Métis homeland and home to one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. All right. So next slide. So to review a little bit of the site history, in 2009, Edmonton School Board surplus 17 sites across the city that were originally designated for future school sites. The school boards came to a decision that they would not use any of these or need any of these sites, and so consequently they were returned to the city's inventory. In 2012, 8 of the 17 sites were put forward at ideal locations for seniors housing developments. To facilitate that development, Council rezoned these sites from public park zone to RA7, which allowed for medium density residential up to a maximum height of 16 meters. In 2014, city administration undertook extensive public engagement with Wedgwood community regarding this specific site, including a public open house, which I know many of you were a part of. And I know when we probably talked in 2017 or 18 about this, I think that public engagement was still really fresh in your minds. So that brings us to 2015. An official city policy to govern the development of surplus school sites was created. The purpose of that policy was to establish guidelines for residential development that maximized economic viability, public benefit, and responsiveness to local conditions and connections to the community. So since the site was approved in 2015, or sorry, I should say, since this policy was approved in 2015, only one seniors housing site has been fully developed and is currently in operation in the neighborhood of Sakaw. So that's in Mill Woods. 2 additional sites that are not specific to seniors housing are currently under development in Kehewin and Ogilvie Ridge. And we can talk a little bit more about the Ogilvie Ridge project sort of later in this discussion. So one of the sort of characteristics of this policy, which is called C583, it established requirements, one of which was the requirement to develop the site as a mix of non-market or below market and market housing. It specifically outlined a target of 50 to 75% non-market housing in each development for a period of 50 years. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something which I think a lot of people in the community might remember. In 2015, the former councillor for the area made a motion that was based on the community feedback, I think following that 2014-2015 engagement period. And a motion was passed by City Council to shift the location of the surplus school site development slightly north and east to allow for a greater setback from existing park amenities and to engage with the community further on this change. So we have a picture here of the site, and I don't know why it's not loading on my computer.
There,
I imagine, yeah.
There
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I thought you had control. My apology. Okay.
No, I'm apparently not as technically adept as I thought. My apologies, Jim.
Okay.
So the original grayed out zone that you see is the original surplus school site. That is still intact. That yellow zone that overlaps by and large with the existing site was the proposed change. However, because this motion is, so many of you will remember that this happened and then you didn't hear anything about it. And it's been 9 years since that motion happened and that conversation happened. It's still outstanding. And I think Kyle can speak more to this, but one of the pieces of feedback, I think that at that time, the community was quite split on whether or not you wanted the site moved more northeast or for it to stay in the same place. So some of the good news on this is that because this motion is still outstanding, one of the next steps for Kyle and his team will be to engage further with the community and establish whether or not this change is still something the community would like to see. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle to talk about the site history from 2016 to 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. If you could forward to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
So following the motion, city administration did submit a land development application in 2016 to shift the site and have it subdivided. This application was ultimately canceled because it didn't have the technical studies to support it. So there was items like the drainage study, it was outstanding. Subsequently, in 2017, 2 of the other seniors sites were listed on the market for seniors housing developments, which ultimately proved unsuccessful. The city also engaged with seniors housing providers to gauge interest in developing any of the outstanding sites but they were rebuffed due to capacity and funding constraints. And in 2021, the Wedgwood Heights neighborhood structure plan was deemed no longer required since the neighborhood was fully established. And as a result of repealing the neighborhood structure plan, the seniors housing designation was also removed from the surplus school site. And finally, in late 2023, city administration brought forward an amendment to the surplus school site policy. Next slide, please. So why this? So to dig into a bit more into the necessity of bringing forward the policy amendment, as part of our regular due diligence, a review of policies in effect at the city, a review of policy C583, the city's surplus school site policy, was conducted within city administration. We found that the policy no longer aligned with the requirements established with provincial legislation, specifically with the Municipal Government Act or the municipal framework of the city. It included outdated references to zoning, classifications, no longer in existence information from the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board, the EMRB. A policy amendment was deemed necessary to bring the policy back in line. And furthermore, housing developers also indicated that a high percentage of affordable units required by the policy created challenges in finding financial feasible in these developments. An independent analysis of the 12 remaining sites was completed and confirmed that the affordability requirements were too restrictive when applied broadly across the sites, and these simply could not be met. So the policy as amended allows greater flexibility for each of the sites regarding the percentage of affordable units and better optionality for built form that can enhance opportunities for the individual sites to best fit their respective neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So to summarize some of the detailed policy amendments, particularly in how they potentially affect the Wedgwood development, we removed the requirement for 50 to 75% of the units to be affordable housing or non-market housing, since this was viewed as broadly too restrictive and not financially feasible. If you just click again, please. While the old policy allowed for some, lastly, the priority of the policy, the Wedgwood site was zoned RA7 or medium density with a maximum height of 16 meters. This amendment didn't change anything in regards to the zoning classification. You could click through as well, please. And the old policy allowed for some ancillary services. The language was vague and unclear. With the amendment, there's allowances for amenities were made more clear, and things like daycares, cafe, or other compatible uses could be included. You could click once more. And then there are a range of allowable housing options. An exclusion of single detached home remains unchanged from the existing policy. And so I think it's important here to clarify exactly what we mean when we talk about affordable housing. Housing is a broad spectrum that covers everything from homelessness to supportive housing to standard market ownership. For Wedgwood and the other surplus school sites, we're only considering the top end of the spectrum: affordable or non-market rental, affordable or non-market home ownership, market rental, and market home ownership. If you could click as well, please. There's a few other bullets on that slide. Yeah, so in Canada, these types of developments are typically geared towards families that pay more than 30% of their households before tax income. Often these developments include a blend of market and affordable homes, which we refer to as mixed market housing, where there's a group of market rate housing units that allow for a portion of affordable housing units to be provided. And I'll just pass it back to Councillor Hamilton.
We can go back to the slide, I think.
Oh,
there,
yes.
yeah, that's perfect. So what I wanted to add to what Kyle had to say is that in the context of what a minimum number of affordable units will be, it's entirely dependent on what the market will bear in each individual neighborhood. One of the reasons that the 50 to 75% policy didn't work is that it, as a blanket policy, it ended up not working in a lot of developments. Is that correct, Kyle?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. That threshold is too high.
Yeah, and as I recall, there was an option often for essentially to buy your way out of it, and people would, I think, choose to do that sometimes. So you didn't end up getting the net benefit of building affordable housing. So, and I also think, and I think a lot of people in the neighborhood would agree, what's considered affordable in one neighborhood is not considered affordable in another. And I know that there's a lot of business owners who live in the neighborhood, a lot of entrepreneurs, and you'll know first and foremost that if a business opportunity is not attractive or financially feasible, then it's a non-starter, right? We don't go into business to lose money. So I also want to mention that it's important when we talk about providing options in built form in an established neighborhood like Wedgwood. Oftentimes we talk about people from outside the neighborhood coming in, but I like to talk about housing option availability to people within the neighborhood as well. I grew up in a neighborhood that had largely single detached homes. That's a characteristic of a lot of neighborhoods built in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And there isn't a lot of places for people who live in the neighborhood to go when they want to have a home that has less maintenance or has a smaller footprint, because the needs of our life change as we either age or have different family configurations. And I think that having these different housing types, not just when we talk about, it doesn't just help us talk about affordability, but helps us talk about housing mobility within our own neighborhood, so that we don't have to leave our neighborhood when our home, for whatever reason, no longer suits our needs. So I also wanted to mention, because I think Kyle brought it up, the old policy allowed for ancillary services, and this was a big point of contention in December because that ancillary services piece was removed. One of the reasons that they removed it was because the language was vague and unclear, but the use still exists. So There was some desire to see ancillary services. I know it's not uniform across the neighborhood, but with the amendment, the allowance for amenities is clearer, and as Kyle mentioned, could include other things like cafes and daycares. We can go on to the next slide, and I'll turn it back to Kyle.
Yeah, so to summarize where the Wedgwood site is today, the site remains in its original location, unsubdivided and pending community engagement. While the zoning classification did not change with the surplus school site policy amendment, the new city's bylaw came into effect on January 1st, 2024, and the site was subsequently rezoned to the nearest similar zone, RM16. This zone maintains the same minimum density requirements of 45 dwelling units per net residential hectare and the same maximum height of 16 meters. In the terms of the designated site users, the senior designation for the site has been removed, as mentioned earlier, with the repeal of the Wedgwood Heights neighborhood structure plan. Although the seniors designation has been removed, that I guess is just a formality. We can talk a little bit later about what that means going forward for the site. Next slide, please. In terms of where we go from here, City Administration is currently reviewing the existing site conditions and determining what technical requirements need to be met to proceed. Once we have a better understanding of any site constraints, we will be approaching the community to discuss the 2015 motion to shift the site towards the northeast. We hope to have both items completed by the spring of this year. And depending on these outcomes of those discussions and the preferred direction of the neighborhood, either a rezoning application will be submitted or City Administration will be returning to Council to ask that the 2015 motion be rescinded. And I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you. So I want to be really clear here that in the event a rezoning is required, there will be further community engagement to support the specific rezoning application. And there will be an opportunity for members to speak to City Council. However, a rezoning would be pretty specific to the zone that already exists on the site and whether or not the site gets moved or what adjustments get made to the footprint. And I want to also be clear that it is very unlikely that there would be a downgrade to the zoning. So there would not be like single detached homes. And I would say at this point, knowing sort of Council's track record on the surplus school site and housing development and housing development in general and the affordable housing file, it would be unlikely that they would keep it as or that they would keep it as parkland because unless there was overwhelming evidence that the site was not feasible for any type of development. As Kyle said, once the rezoning conversation has happened, the city would prepare the land for sale. And that includes an additional touch point with Council through executive committee. And I want to be clear that sometimes when there's a rezoning in the process, administration might initiate a land sale concurrent to it. It's a very ordinary thing for city administration to start a land sale process because it can take quite a bit of time, and they will make that contingent on the rezoning. If the land is sold and a developer is selected for the site, the developer is required to engage with you, the community, as per policy C593A. So if we can go to the next slide, Jim. So thank you. This concludes our presentation. I know that there's going to be a lot of questions. And so just, hold on to those questions. Jim gave us some good options. And we're going to put up our contact information. I do want to note, something that motivated me to have this conversation. Um, uh, I know that the community wasn't well informed about these changes and specifically the policy change. And I think that it's led to a sense of mistrust and skepticism about what the city is doing. Part of that has to do with the engagement, and I'll say that I'm not happy with how the community essentially wasn't notified. I know a lot of you received an email from me personally, alerting you or making you aware of this change. So how I understand it happened was that unfortunately the email that was used to contact the community league was no longer in service, and nobody knew about it. Something that I'm looking, and it's not Kyle's fault, I want to say. Kyle is not a party to this. But what I do want to say about that is not an acceptable excuse to me. I don't know that it would have changed the outcome of this, but going forward, I'm asking that city administration include homeowners associations, for instance, on their contact list, in part because you have an enormous membership, 100% membership. And through West Edmonton, Southwest Edmonton, and Southeast Edmonton, homeowners associations have a much bigger role than in other parts of the city. And I think community leagues also have an enormous role, but I want to sort of make clear that homeowners associations can be a partner for the city in some of these either policy changes or planning changes that happen across the city. We've now corrected, I'll say we've corrected the email going forward, but I am looking again for a policy change and for a little bit more accountability in terms of how the city does engagement and maintains those lists so that this doesn't happen again. With that, I will turn it back to Jim to hear from our other stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Kyle. Appreciate all the information on the slides. Running a little blind here, but I think we made it through, so that's all right. Thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to hand over for about 5 minutes to Carol Bruneman to speak on behalf of the Community League. Carol.
Thanks, Jim. Good evening, everyone. I would like to say our family has called Wedgwood home for 30 years, and I've been an active member of the Community League for more than a decade. I was also actually the Community League rep on the Homeowners Association Surplus School Site Committee between 2012 and 2017. I can tell you that that committee spent months defending the community's parkland. While strongly opposed to the rezoning, we also advocated really hard for some type of ancillary space, not a coffee shop, but some kind of space that would be the community's for us to gather. If something was going to be built, we wanted to ensure that there would be a benefit for residents long term. I can tell you promises were made back in the day that we would be properly consulted in the future. But once again, the community was taken by surprise, just as we were in 2012. It was a deja vu. The only indication that something was happening in the community was due to those roadside signs, which were nebulous. They didn't communicate the intent, and moreover, significantly, the impacts to our community of this proposal that went forward in December. I only saw the signs on November 29th. I checked out the link. They didn't provide any information. I dug into the council agenda packages and discovered the December 6th meeting. So we immediately contacted the HOA on December 1st to ask what was happening. We provided a copy of the proposal that we found online, and we clearly expressed that the proposal included significant changes and requested an update on what the HOA position would be. Given the short notice, we did not attend the meeting. However, consistent with the past on this file, it was our expectation the HOA would represent the Community League and all residents' interests on the surplus school site matters. I have to say, after listening to the proceedings online, I was shocked, to be honest, that no opposition was given by the HOA or even questions to clarify understanding. So we immediately, as Sarah knows, reached out to her office expressing our concerns. We are aware of the whole debacle around the emails, but regardless, we were not properly notified. And, you know, I would have to say that this was completely the deja vu for 2012. So it's a failure 2 times over. I know that the HOA has been in contact with the city for more than 5 years on this file. So surely somewhere there's contact information for the HOA. So yeah, there is no excuses for not having properly engaged us. And the reason why I bring all this up is because I think it's all proof that what truly did happen back in December was a complete failure on the part of the city to properly engage our community. And so for that reason, our community league remains completely opposed to the proposal that went forward for the following reasons. The unacceptable communication and consultation. It was not consistent or aligned with that public engagement policy you're referring to, Sarah, C593A, that we're expected to believe that developers are going to follow because the city hasn't followed it. Secondly, we are still wondering if our hard-fought interest in an ancillary space, which means a dedicated gathering space for our community, would be possible in future developments. And thirdly, even after hearing this presentation today, because it kind of just mirrors exactly that proposal that's online, I'm still not clear on what impacts this policy shift would have on our community. I want to let everybody know, in 2012, Councillor Sloan at the time, she was a councillor from another area. She actually took the time to visit the park to understand what was being proposed. When the motion was being debated, she said she couldn't support it. In her words, she said that would be like putting a pink elephant into someone's living room. So now we're wondering what else may end up in that park with that elephant. So in closing, the Community League has 2 requests, one for Councillor Hamilton and the administration. I actually believe that we need to take the necessary steps to amend the motion that was approved on December 6th. Or from, I guess, procedural process, I guess we'd need to introduce a new motion to exclude the Wedgwood surplus school site and extend to our community proper consultation on this policy change. In addition, I would like to request that the HOA, and on behalf of the community, investigate all legal remedies available to residents, given the city's failure again to properly consult, and any other tools they may have as the representative body for the community on this surplus school site. Yes, those would be our 2 requests. I'm very pleased that we've had a chance to convey that today, but we are looking for some further action than what's been presented to us today. I'd be happy to answer any questions as we move through the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I'm going to turn it over the 5 minutes next to Robert Worth. Robert, while you're talking, I'm going to try and get your slide up there, but I'll try doing my best with it. But go ahead, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Sarah, Kyle, for coming out and meeting with us tonight. Thank you as well, Carol, for what you had to say. Very important thoughts, I think. I speak on behalf of an overwhelming majority of Wedgwood residents, as well as many others outside of the Wedgwood community who utilize Wedgwood Park. I'm here to declare that over 80% of the residents in Wedgwood are opposed to any form of residential or retail development within Wedgwood Park. The city already knows this. The city has known it for 12 years, when in 2012, this community made it abundantly clear that it was absolutely opposed to such development. And for 12 years, the city has not been listening to this community. Councillor, it is time for you and your colleagues to listen. Thousands of people in this city and community regularly use and rely on the open green space in Wedgwood Park. People from throughout the city and of all ages are using the open space for sport. For example, the Edmonton Minor Soccer Association expressed to us that these fields contain 2 of the most utilized under 9 to 11 regulation-sized fields in the area, and the adjacent green space is used through the summer for training purposes. Furthermore, the open green space and surrounding park is used for relaxation and mental health, and is where the public gets back to nature. The city's plans will eliminate the majority of the park's open space. We oppose the city's efforts largely on 3 grounds. First, the city's efforts are discriminatory. City policy is to, quote, manage the impact of environmental stressors on people and ensure protection of open space, end quote. I ask, why then is the city taking away the majority of the park's open space? Furthermore, out of 20 parks that contain surplus school sites, Wedgwood Park is the smallest of them all and will be left with by far the smallest amount of remaining open space. This is clearly shown in the following visuals. Thank you, Jim. The top table regarding total park size, including the surplus school site area. 19 other parks average almost 21 acres in size. Wedgwood Park is only 11 acres, approximately half that of the average. And regarding remaining open space after surplus school site development, those same 19 parks are left with almost 17 acres of open space. Wedgwood Park will be left with 2 acres compared to the average of 17 acres. To illustrate, Kaniski Gardens on the left. After development, they will still have 13 acres of open space. Kehewan Park still has 19 acres of open green space after development. Wedgwood Park, there we are, 2 acres. Councillor, what do you have to say about these things? The city has painted all these sites with the same brush, but doing so severely discriminates against this community. Second, the city's efforts are invalid. The surplus school site is currently designated municipal reserve land, which provincial law declares can only be used for park or public recreational use and nothing else. The city's 2012 residential rezoning of this municipal reserve therefore means nothing. It is in fact invalid. The city has no right to implement residential zoning on land that is currently designated for the public's benefit as municipal reserve land, and which is to be used for only park or recreational use. Third, the city's efforts are punitive. The city is poised to remove a public benefit from this neighborhood, which was lawfully given to the public when the Wedgwood subdivision was built. Doing away with that benefit deprives thousands of people from across the city and within Wedgwood. The city current policy is therefore a punitive one, and it is unjust. In conclusion, we call upon the city to immediately halt its discriminatory, invalid, and punitive plans to develop in Wedgwood Park. This site is the community's park, declared to be so by provincial law. Surely there are other places in this city to prudently develop residential and retail space. Development within Wedgwood Park only takes away from the thousands of people, both within Wedgwood and across the city, that use and rely on this park. Councillor, please let your colleagues know that on this subject, the city is against nearly an entire community of Edmontonians. And we are united in full opposition against these policies for the reasons already mentioned. This town hall will be over shortly, but we are not going anywhere. No residential or retail development is welcome in Wedgwood Park. It is high time that the city understands this and revises its policies to align with responsible development and the will of this city's residents.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate that. So we're going to jump into our Q&A session here shortly. Sarah, Councillor Hamilton or Kyle, did you have any comments you wanted to provide back on that first, or do you want to jump into more Q&A?
I think we can get right to questions.
Okay. Dean, I'll let you start. Is there anything on the Q&A or chat, or the came in through the wedgwood.ca site that you want to?
Yeah, we've got 8 Q&A. Marshall's going to handle the Q&A, and I'm going to watch the chat. So I'll let Marshall start rattling off the questions, and we'll sift through them, folks. Okay.
Okay. So just a reminder for everybody: try on your Q&As to be as succinct as possible, 1 to 2 minutes, allowing the respondent about 2 minutes, and then a 1 minute rebuttal for that. So you'll hear a noise in your earphones, perhaps. That means the time is up. So thank you. let's go.
Okay, Jim, sure. Good evening, everyone. Marshall Hunter here. Jim, I have one question. That is, can all the participants see the chat, the Q&A questions, I should say? Because some of them are not questions, they're statements. I think it's important that people have access to them. So I'm not going to read them if participants can scroll through them and see them. I'm just going to deal with questions if that's all right.
I believe from the process, everybody gets to see all of the questions, so they can see them, yes?
Okay. Well, then the first question, and maybe it was answered because it was earlier in a presentation, but the question was asked, when saying affordable housing, is that the same as low income housing? I think that Kyle answered that, but I'll certainly turn it over to you, Kyle, if you want to address it.
Yeah, I did touch on that during the presentation, but I think just to reiterate, affordable housing means a lot of different things, and I think it's really important to talk about what the differences are for affordable housing. So in this case, what I stated earlier was that, you know, we're not considering any sort of like social or supportive housing for the site. It would be primarily anything from affordable rentals all the way to home ownership or any blend of those combinations. So in a lot of times in developments, we'll see what we call like a mixed market approach. So there'll be a number of market rate units that are there to support a lower number of affordable housing units. And that's where that affordability aspect comes in. So, you know, I've seen depending on the developer and the development, I've seen anything from as low as 5% being affordable. Like we were talking about in Kikiwin and Ogilvie Ridge, those are higher rates of affordability, but we're finding moving forward that supporting 50 to 75% of the units being supportable isn't realistic for the sites moving forward. So we've allowed that flexibility to have a lower number of affordable units for the sites.
Thank you.
Next question is, says, as this happened and moved forward in Cameron Heights, has there been any analysis into the drop in home prices or longer days on the market there? Again, Kyle, that might be for you to answer in terms of some of your site analysis work that you may or may not have done.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with the project in Cameron Heights yet, so I can't speak to that. But I know generally the literature doesn't support that there's a drop in home value. I know that typically you see the same increase in prices, whether there's a affordable housing in a neighborhood or not. And that's been a general trend. I know there's a lot of research that's been done out of BC to support that.
And I want to note, I think that is referencing the multifamily development that kind of sits at the top of the pathway between Cameron Heights and Wedgwood. That was zoned RA7 from the time that the neighborhood was conceived. I know that it shifted from, at one point it was supposed to be luxury condos, and now it's apartment building. As a building type, it was always meant to be there. There was always going to be something there. And it wasn't on a designated surplus school site. So I think that's a really notable difference between Cameron Heights and Wedgwood.
Thank you. Marshall, next.
There is quite a bit of a discussion in this next question. I'm just going to break it down to what I think is the key, and maybe this is directed to both Councillor Hamilton and Kyle. The question is no development at all a consideration?
I can answer that. And I guess currently with the direction we have in the previous and current policy, that is not the direction we have at this time. The policy clearly identifies the site to be developed. The motion that was presented in 2015 to shift the site is something that can be discussed, and how best the site can be interfaced with the park. So that's something we'd like to engage with on the community further. But like I said in the presentation, we just need to make sure that we have an understanding of the technical requirements before we approach the community again.
I'll also add that I know that, and I think Carol brought it up, how long the engagement has been on this. And this has happened in other communities as well. I mentioned I wanted to talk about Ogilvy Ridge because this is almost identical to what happened in Ogilvy Ridge. To back it up, similar situation, surplus school site, they also have an HOA in Ogilvy Ridge. I know this feels really fast for what happened in Wedgwood, but I'll say that the week after, I think actually days after this policy change happened, the Ogilvy Ridge site was sold and rezoned. It happened extremely fast. So they actually have home ed in there working with them. But something I think want to say one of the learnings that we heard about was that these conversations started so long ago. And I know many of you have reached out over the years and said, is there anything new on this? Do we have any information on this? And we didn't. I'm, you know, this, I have come along with you on this journey. But having this process take so long with so little information, I think Kyle will agree, has not been helpful. It's not served the community well. And it's led to, I want to say, a lack of trust and cynicism. And I think so. When we talk about what's next, when Kyle says they're going to do a technical analysis, and then based on that technical analysis, come back to the community with site configuration options. I think that the commitment is to do that this winter, so that you'll have a sense of what the next steps are before another year passes. I don't think that's fair. However, and this is a very political answer, based on what my colleagues have advocated for, the support generally that council has shown for affordable housing. I'm Carol, I'm happy to make that motion, but I'm going to be honest with you that I'm going to lose it 12-1. And it's because council's direction has been to build up housing where we have space to build housing. I respect that I know there's a lot of people in this neighborhood who are original residents of this neighborhood. This has always been a park space. I think that is also a policy failure. There should have been, or there was planned to be a school there. And I think that when the community or when the school board decided that they weren't going to build a school was way too late. I think that our own city policies on that are not clear enough, and it allows sites like this to languish for decades across the city. In other municipalities like Sherwood Park, they say we have a school site, who's going to build a school? And the school board that wants it gets it. And if everyone says we don't need a school in this area, then they move on so that community has a sense of what is happening in their neighborhood. And I think that we've been doing that backwards in Edmonton. That's something I've been working over the last few years to change. And it unfortunately brings us to these conversations where there was always meant to be a structure on that site. What that structure was, whether it was a school or housing, changed over the years.
Thank you, Sarah. Marshall, I'm going to pause you for a minute. I'm hoping that Ethan, our Zoom webinar guru, can get one of the hand raises to be able to ask a question.
Sure, Jim. Sure, Jim. I have Grayson Roth here. So, Grayson, if you can unmute your microphone and ask away. Okay, Grayson.
I'm sorry, I didn't have a question. Did you see a question that I posed?
We saw that you had a hand raised there, Grayson.
Oh, my apologies. That must have been an accident.
Okay.
I think Grayson's question is 2 acres, Kyle. That's all he asked.
That was more of a comment.
Oh, it's a comment. Okay.
Okay, so we do have many other hand raises here, so I'll go on to the next person in the queue. That's Amina, I'm going to allow you to.
Unmute.
There you go.
Okay, hello. So my question is, for the higher tax bracket that we're in here in Wedgwood, how does this apply to affordable housing? And how is it fair and equitable to us? That's my first question. My second one is we do only have one entrance in and out. How are we going to add 50 to 70 units when we have one entrance going in and out? If you go just across the bridge at the Lassard, over the Lassard Road to Anthony Henday, have you seen how it's some people, it takes them, like, I know people who live there, a half an hour to get home. So my question is, why is the city focusing on areas that are already constricted? We have so many places, like we have the airport, we have so many other places in the city that need to be developed. Why are you guys focusing on places where it's not feasible? That's my question. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry, everybody.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sarah or Kyle.
Sure, I can take a crack at that. First of all, I want to clarify that the density per hectare is still 45. I think the site is about minimum density per hectare. So while there is no maximum here, I don't know that you'd see like 70 units. So I just want to clarify that 50 to 70 number was a percentage that used to be sort of mandated in policy and is no longer. So you could see, depending on how numbers work, 20 to 30%, you could see. So I don't want to speculate too much, because that's, I think, moving away from I think the bigger issue you're talking about. And we're going to put some of the answers to these questions on my blog over the next few days. That being said, I mean, I know that Wedgwood feels, and the community feels like this has been hyper-focused. I want to say that I think that a lot of communities that have surplus school sites feel this way. Your tax assessment is, I mean, it's based on market value. So as Kyle said, you know, the literature has shown that there isn't an impact. This has come up year over year, but you know, if you're concerned that you're being assessed too high, or, and I've never gotten this, you're being assessed too low, you can appeal that through the assessment review process. And I think that I'll point out, okay, so there's a lot we could say about Lassard Road, and I don't want to move too off the topic of the potential housing development in Wedgwood. But when you go into newer neighborhoods, there is a lot of density per hectare there. I'm sure, if, as you've noticed, if you go into the Hamptons, you go into Glastonbury, and especially in Edgemont, there's different housing types, and they're much closer together. And the over time, and those communities being built, I think more recently, there's been an emphasis on having more density per hectare in our city, because it costs the city a lot to run services to low density housing. You know, we talk, some people might say, well, you could annex. I know that Wedgwood used to be part of Parkland County. It was annexed in, I want to say, the 60s or 70s. We could annex more land. The problem is we have to run services. We have to, if you talk to the folks on the Crescent, you know, there's legacy issues there. We have to run services. We have to run transportation. Your neighborhood has been impacted by some of the hard choices that council has made. And I have been with you through that. I supported you in that. I know it, but what is driving the increase in taxation is that we spread ourselves so thin. And we now know we're expecting about 1 million more people in our city over the next 30 years. We grow at about a rate of 1.5 to 2% a year. And if we don't want to continue to drive taxes higher, we have to fit that population as they come, as they're born, into the footprint of the city that we have. So we're having really tough conversations like this across the city because for those reasons. So I know that was a bit longer. Sorry, Jim.
Kyle, did you have something?
Yeah, so just to add on that too, we'll be, as part of our application, we'll be required to submit a TIA, so a traffic impact assessment. And so that's just to get an understanding of what the traffic is in the area and how this developing the site might affect the traffic, and what sort of, if any, upgrades are required to support the site.
Thank you. Okay, let's take, I've now got my hand raised chart here. So let's take Carrie Sharp, please. Amina, if you can put your hand down, that'd be great. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, Carrie, go ahead. Unmute yourself and talk. Carrie, if you can unmute, that'd be awesome. Ethan, is that something you need help with?
I can't unmute her, but she has the ability to unmute right now. So,
okay.
Carrie, if you're able to unmute, unmute. Otherwise, we'll move on and maybe come back to you.
Sure. Okay, let's. Mark Fiala, please. You're next.
Hi there. Thanks for letting me speak. In 2012, the city heard that the Wedgwood neighborhood was largely opposed to any developments in Wedgwood Park. The same opposition was raised in 2014, 15. The same opposition is being raised now. Based on our consultations, actually quite extensive with the residents of Wedgwood, we estimate that a referendum on the subject would likely be like 90% or maybe even 95%. Overwhelming majority vote opposing any development in the park. So why is the city refusing to acknowledge the overwhelming force of public opposition against the city's proposed developments?
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, so I can jump in there. I guess, yeah, there's, the city, we as affordable housing, we have limited opportunity to, finding and selecting sites throughout the city for developments. And so when council designated these sites in 2012, we as administration, when we took them into our inventory, that's when the decision to develop those sites were made, just based on the fact that we no longer needed them, or the school board no longer needed them for schools. But now also council has given us a motion that 16% of affordable housing be developed in all neighborhoods throughout the city. So when we look at the city as a whole, to meet our city plan objectives, we need to have affordable housing in every neighborhood to ensure that we can meet those broader objectives.
Thank you.
Do you want me to? I appreciate the question, and I don't think there's a really good answer to it. I think Kyle did a really good job. Council directed the city to pursue housing on surplus school sites, and unless I'll be blunt, there's a lot of neighborhoods where, and I think you're going to probably ask me about some of those neighborhoods. There's a lot of neighborhoods where new housing developments have been opposed. And I've sat through those public hearings, and I'll say that the threshold for not developing a surplus school site is incredibly high. And it's because the development plan conforms with the zoning that exists on the site today, and the city's policies on developing housing. And so it is extremely common for neighborhoods to resist any kind of multifamily housing development. I know there was a lot of opposition in Cameron Heights, although I would say not as uniform. But I'll go back to it. There's always going to be a structure on this site, and the fact that it wasn't a school, and the fact that it's taken this long is a failure. And I think that's a failure in the community. I think it's a failure in city policy. But I don't want to leave you with there isn't a petitioning process on this. I'm sorry. So
Okay, thank
yeah,
you. Yeah,
I think
Mark,
we had
you've got a minute for a response. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll be brief. Thank you for that answer, Councillor Hamilton. The Leski school site, and I know you said we're going to ask about other ones, and here it comes. Despite having twice the space of ours, and after any proposed development, is 8 to 9 times as much space that's left. Plus, all that land's flat, and the potential construction is our only flat land. This in Oleski was paused in 2021 due to high engagements and opposition. So why is Wedgwood being treated so poorly? The city is giving preferential treatment to some over others. So can you explain how theirs is on pause, and theirs is a much better site, but yet ours, with just a tiny little bit of land, usable land that is for park, is still being considered? Thank you.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that. Yes, I don't want this to get into a debate because we're going to go way longer, and we've got a lot of questions out there. So perhaps we can deal with the Olescu in another format with regards to that. Let's move it back to Marshall for a question from the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Here's a question. Why was the surplus school site not offered to the community? And I don't know what's meant by community, if perhaps a group of residents, for purchase when the board declared it surplus?
Yes, I can answer that question. So just with the when a new neighborhood gets constructed, a developer is required to provide 10% of the land for park and school use. So when that process happens, the city the school board put up their hand and they said, hey, we need part of the school open space site for a school. And so when they surplus it, it gets given back to us first. And then we as administration decide whether it's surplus to our needs. So in that instance, back in 2012, affordable housing said, we could use this site for that use. And so because it was surplus and because of how that process works in the land development, it comes back to us first, and then we surplus it. If it wasn't surplus to, or if it was then surplus to our needs, that's when it would be sold on the open market to another party.
Okay, thank you very much. Kelly Gray, the hand up is for you. Go ahead.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Thank you to you both. I had a lot of points to make. I used to be the president for about 10 years on the community league, so I've been involved in this from day one. I had a few points to make, but the Wedgwood Park Group covered quite a bit of them, like the blanket strategy and consultation, and how cynical we are of consultation, because we've gone through the surplus school site consultation, the Epcor solar farm, the bus route changes, and now this affordable housing initiative without having any say. These consultations are not consultations. They're just, hey, we said we'd listen, but we don't. The actual consultation of us in our neighborhood for our tennis court was actually more onerous, and we had to abide by it more than you guys listened to the consultation. So that's a comment. There's other things here that I wanted to cover, but basically I keep hearing the word affordable housing. And that's the reason behind this. But then you change to, well, there's only a certain percentage, a minimal percentage. So what's that look like? Does the percentage change year to year? Like this year it's 10% and next year it'll be 20. But this idea of affordable housing as the reason behind it is a red herring, first and foremost, because of the minimal amount that it will actually give to the Affordable Housing Initiative. The actual development in Cameron Heights and the density in other areas has been organically developed because of the newness of the areas. Whereas Wedgwood is 30 years old, and you're basically putting, as Carol put it, a pink elephant in. And I know this is not going to change, but I think it tells you the spirit behind Wedgwood and the lengths that they're about to go to challenge all of your ideas behind what you're trying to propose. My last, and this is a question, what is the financial burden for the city, and who are the stakeholders that are pushing this forward? Who gets the net gain? And actually, I have a request for Sarah, is if we could get a list of all council discussions and relevant committee hearing notes on this particular site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
So first of all, yes, Kelly, we can follow up. I think it might be easier for us to sort of compile that into a blog post of some sort, so that everyone in the neighborhood or everyone with a vested interest in this can speak to or can understand better the decision around this. I think that came up. So I want to talk about what I think is a good point that you made that came up on December 6th, is that when Kyle's right, council set 16% affordable housing as a target. And when you look at that spectrum of affordable housing, that's so many things. I'm also like, your neighborhood is 99% built out. You're not getting 16% in my lifetime, unless there's, unless there's a big change in built form. So, and that came up on December 6th as well. This isn't about hitting that target, but it is about creating housing options in every neighborhood, including, and, again, we've been talking about people we often talk about affordable housing as people from outside the neighborhood. I would wager that there's people within your own neighborhood, people, if you have kids, not even kids, teenagers, young adults who are just starting out in their life and they want to stay in the neighborhood, or conversely, people who are older and want to downsize. I think sometimes the fortunes of our life ebb and flow, and it would be probably not great for you to lose a really great neighbor and a friend in your neighborhood for that reason. And people have lots of that. So I agree with you to an extent that you're not going to see 16%, and this isn't going to get you anywhere close to 16%. But it will create some options for the people who already live in your neighborhood.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, let's go back to the questions. Marshall.
Thanks, Jim. This is a two-parter, but related. The first part is, would new residents moving into this proposed development have to pay the same HOA dues that the rest of us do? And then secondly, would any new development that coming into Wedgwood have to adhere to the Wedgwood design guidelines that all of the other residents have to abide by?
So maybe I'll start, and then Kyle can talk a little bit about how so as you know, HOAs, I believe, exist under the Societies Act. Did I get that right, Jim? Yeah. So when your an HOA is a third-party agreement. Essentially, your HOA is a separate corporation, and the city doesn't have a stake in the HOA. And so the city can't force the buyer of the site to conform to HOA standards or to pay into the HOA. But I think that there's a good example from Ogilvy Ridge that Kyle can speak to. And I think most importantly, this would be part of the discussions with any potential buyer would be apprised of the existence of an HOA and asked to engage. And Kyle has more on that.
Yeah, so that's correct, Councillor Hamilton. Yeah, so when we list the site, we'll be informing the potential buyers. The preference from the community is that but it'll ultimately be up to the potential builder or operator whether it's feasible or not, as the intent is for affordable housing. And we will be encouraging the builder or operator to work closely with the HOA to allow for other options or ways potentially for the developer to contribute towards community amenities. I know this is something that the Homeowners Association in Ogilvy Ridge is doing. They're working with HomeEd right now to determine what exactly that's going to look like. Yeah, I'm following that closely, and I'll have a better understanding once that development progresses.
Thank you. Let's go back to the hand raise. Cassia Marcinkowski, please. Cassia, there you go.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi. So I did write the question in the Q&A, but I'll just reread it. So the city has issued some general statements that the proposed development will not affect our home prices here. There's a 2015 report there with a vague mention of an assessment of 9 adjacent properties with no details what that means. And a basic Google search on Wedgwood brings up selling features like beautiful central park, large open spaces, urban sanctuary, safest, ultra quiet with plenty of green space, and all of these selling features would be greatly eliminated. And not to mention the homes in the closest proximity to the site would be impacted by the loss of privacy and view and tranquility. And they will be significantly devalued. So I think on behalf of many residents here, and to appease our worries, can the city please provide a current proper detailed real estate assessment of how we might be impacted following the loss of so much park and recreational area, and especially for the total losses in value to the adjacent properties?
Thank you, Cassia.
So I understand that concern. The city, I don't know that the city provides, other than your market value assessment that you get every year. I don't know that the city does sort of a blanket valuation like that. I often when we're doing negotiations, for instance, in terms of acquisitions, we ask people, the city will for its purposes of purchases hire an assessor, but if the homeowner disagrees with that assessment, and I'll be honest, oftentimes they do, they have to get their own assessment done. I know that it was discussed earlier in the conversation, and maybe again, if this is a concern, the HOA and residents individually may wish to undertake an independent analysis for their own records. And that's you're entirely entitled to do so. I see some skepticism about city assessment. It's not the first time I've heard of that. And so my best advice would be to undertake a third-party assessment from an independent assessor, and to talk to legal representation. That is entirely within your rights on this.
Thank you. Let's go on to Terry Vanka, please. Terry, please unmute.
Good?
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I just would like to comment that I've been agreeing with a lot of things that are said, so it sort of simplifies my discussion here. But I guess the question that we really should be asking is, what is right for our neighborhood? What do we need in our neighborhood as citizens? Certainly, we've established the sports facilities, the soccer fields, field hockey pitches, etc., are critically used. We have access to the river valley. The city, I congratulate you on doing a wonderful job on the 184th Street rehabilitation project. And so what is it we need that could help our facility? And as Councillor Hamilton pointed out, there will be a structure on the site. So perhaps we should be looking at that, the answer to that question, and potentially looking at a community center or something along those lines where we can have a place of gathering and meeting and set up ancillary support structures. Is that something that could be on the table?
Thank you, Terry.
I might let Kyle speak to this, but I think that's I appreciate your perspective, Terry. I appreciate a number of speakers have said, I don't want a coffee shop in my neighborhood, and that's fine. And we talk about commercial uses, but going back to that ancillary use, the number one thing that we heard the need for in the neighborhood was a gathering place of some sorts. And you don't have a community hall. I think you're one of the only ones on the east side of the Anthony Henday that doesn't have a community hall, Cameron Heights, of course. And so there's really limited opportunities in your neighborhood to gather without leaving that. So I can't tell you what you need. That's something I've heard, but I think my hope would be if the development on the site were to proceed, that you would have that you are already thinking about what are the needs of your community, and to have a constructive conversation with your fellow residents about potentially engaging that developer, whoever develops the site, to make sure that it, whatever happens suits the needs of the people who already live there.
Thank you. Kyle, did you have anything to add more on that?
No, actually, Councillor Hamilton.
Okay, very good. I'm going to have to do a time check because we've only got 9 minutes left in our session. There'll be no way that we're going to get to all the hand raised questions. So I suggest to anyone who's got a hand raised, if you haven't already, to put it into the Q&A, and we will get those Q&As out to Councillor Hamilton and Kyle Payne and get those answered back for you. But there's just no way physically tonight we're going to be able to get them all done. So let's go on to the next question. Cynthia Brown. Please mute yourself, Cynthia.
Okay, thank you. Just like to say that I liked all the people with their insight into what's happening to our neighborhood. Two things that, other than the road, two things that really hit home for me is the safety of our children. It's a curved street, busy enough as is, that's a worry. And the security for all of us when there's this massive amount of more cars coming into the neighborhood. Third thing, commercial. We don't need commercial, it's all at Hawkstone. And Wedgwood Park, I have a question. The last batch of the park, was that paid for by the community?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, so I guess the park site would have been dedicated when the neighborhood was subdivided. So like I mentioned previously, when a developer creates a neighborhood, 10% of the land is for parks and schools. And so that would have been dedicated to the city at time of subdivision when the neighborhood was created.
As I recall, some of the amenities, Dean or Jim, you could probably speak to it. The amenities like the tennis courts, for instance, were built by the HOA or maintained by the HOA, correct?
And the community league had a big involvement. We used a lot of the bingo casino funds to be able to repurpose and do what needed to be done with all of that. So it's all a community effort for sure. Okay, thanks, Cynthia. I hope that answered your question. Jenny Stephanie, I hope I pronounced your name right. Jenny, go ahead, please unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. So yes, my name is Dr. Jenny Stephanie, and I do understand the need to address the City of Edmonton's housing situation. But my question for you is, at what cost? According to the Government of Canada, 30% of Canadian children are obese, not just overweight, but obese. And according to Statistics Canada, 90% of Canadian children do not meet the minimum physical activity guidelines. A study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in 2018 concluded that there was a positive association between urban green space and physical activity. And there was also a decrease in mortality rates, short-term cardiovascular markers, and violence. We have a beautiful park that is widely used by many communities in West Edmonton. With the development of this park, we'll be taking away a source of physical activity for children and will only be contributing to the chronic disease crisis. So again, I ask, is it really worth it to trade one crisis for another? Has the city considered the negative health ramifications of this move?
I think the most succinct way to answer that is that the city has a sort of open spaces plan based on sort of what the allocation of green space is in every neighborhood. The current space that is green is not factored in to what Wedgwood's long-term allocation is. So as I've mentioned before, there was always intended to be a structure on this site. What function that structure has is different, but when you look at the allocation of parkland versus areas that are zoned for housing, that was not, this has been exempted from Wedgwood's allocation, and I believe it still meets the sort of threshold for the amount of green space that other neighborhoods are allocated in.
Thank you.
In the city.
Can I have one more moment? I'm sorry. I understand how it was attributed to be used, but that doesn't change how it is currently used. And I think that city needs to acknowledge how it's being used. We need more of the city councilors to come and see the use of this space, because there's a huge difference between how you have allocated it and how it is used. And that is what I'm talking about, with the effects on the health of our children. Thank you. Thank you.
Canuck boy, please. Please unmute yourself, Canuck, and you'll have just a few minutes because we're at 8:26.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I have attended the last meeting regarding this development at the City Hall with some of my neighbors. And we left confused because there are so many things has been decided, and including the mayor mentioned that we've already agreed to the building of senior housing, which we have no idea about. So if something like that has been already decided, I would like to know when and how this thing is decided. If it is not, then, I mean, so far, the way I understood it, many of our residents are saying, like, more than 90% of the Wedgwood residents are opposing to any kind of development. So, because if we do that, if we oppose to all these things, I mean, there is no reason or there's no point of us discussing technicality or I don't know, whether it is seniors home building or low-income residents and stuff like that. But the first thing we should be addressed, that's the way I understood it, is when city are trying to counsel us as a resident, they're trying to find out what is our concern is. So if 90% of us are opposing to all these things, there is no point for us to discuss on what kind of building to put this and how high it has to be, the building. It all doesn't make sense. But the first and the basic thing that we need to address is, if we oppose it, do we have reason? Yes. There are, like, many of my residents right now, they say that, in fact, one of the person is technically, he proved so many points that the Wedgwood field green space is not actually feasible for any kind of development. So we must first address this thing, and let us do our due diligence before we try to discuss whether is it going to be seniors or is it going to be low-income housing. It just doesn't make sense. So our point of discussion, maybe next time, if this is possible, You know, I like to have this thing, this discussion in person. You know, that way we'll be able to see, you know, each other, and then we'll know who are the interested parties. So let's address and solve this problem first. You know, the 90% of the Wedgwood residents oppose this thing. I think I'm sure our councillor Sarah Hamilton is she is standing for our concern. I have seen her. She voted for us. And I think what I'm asking Sarah Hamilton, Councillor Sarah Hamilton, to do this is, you know, please follow our interest and with all the proof that we supplied.
Henrik, thank you very much. Anyone who's left with their hands up, please ask the questions through the Q&A. We'll get back to you. Sarah does want to answer the Alescu question. That will be it. After that, we will get this presentation that was presented all out to everybody. The questions that you have will all get to the city, and we'll get those all answered. So Sarah, go ahead. A few minutes for Alescu.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's attention tonight. And because I know you've got a lot going on. So I appreciate you taking time away from your busy lives to have this discussion. My assistant Elizabeth has been on the she's also watching, so she's been taking notes of the questions, and we have this recorded. So I'm hoping that we can get to some of those questions. I wanted to, before we go, address the question on Alescu, because I know that's come up a few times. It's also a surplus school site, but it's different. And I want to just talk about the ways that it's different. I don't know the status of it at this time, but it has not been zoned yet. So it is still technically a school site, and it was not, I'll say that when they went out and did engagement, it was for a full market value zoning. So they were looking at turning it into either, I think at the time, we've changed the zones a bit, but it was RF5 or it was a commercial zone with housing above it. And so they were not having the affordable conversation that we're having. It wasn't part of a housing program. And I don't know the reason that it was postponed or that it hasn't been pursued. Kyle might have more on that, but it's a very different site, and I don't want, I want to sort of give that context of the different histories behind it. Kyle, could you speak more to what's going on in Alescu?
Yeah, so I don't know the full story behind it, but I know it's on hold because they're trying to complete a number of technical studies for the site. They're just completing some due diligence, and I think other areas of the city asked for a number of studies to be updated. So I think they're waiting on some, I don't know if it's transportation and some environmental studies as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're 2 minutes past our time. I want to thank everybody. As you can tell, an impassioned group of people concerned about Wedgwood surplus school site. Those information will get to you. We'll share the information that you've shared. Sarah, Kyle, you've told us a plan going forward with communication and consultation. We're looking forward to that. It's just a matter now of getting this through. I don't think you've stopped yet to hear from the Wedgwood residents. I think there's going to be lots of passion shown. I think we're going to have this discussion. Perhaps we'll have another discussion needed for this whole process again to be able to resolve and understand everything that's going on. But am very glad that we were able to do it. Apologize if some people didn't get all their questions asked or the thoroughness of it, but we just could never get to it with regards to that. So from that perspective, as a meeting presenter, I apologize, and we'll try and make sure we get everything in there. But on behalf of us, thank you. Sarah, thank you, Kyle, and thank you everybody who presented. Very well job, very well represented by everyone in Wedgwood and the city. So thank you very much and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.